Welcome back to the program. We're joined now by Jamil Jaffer. He is National Security Institute founder at the George Mason University Law School. He's a former senior counsel at the House Intelligence Committee. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you wrote a piece for Roll Call, and you say that FISA lapsing for the first time since it was created in 2008 is a lose-lose act of sabotage.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the challenge is that this is our most productive intelligence collection authority out there. Contributes about 60% of the information in the president's daily brief, the compendium the president gets in the morning that has all the threats to the nation, all the important intelligence information. 60% of that comes from this collection authority. So getting rid of it and allowing it to expire, even for a short period, whether it's a few days, a week, the House is out of session for at least a week, so it'll be at least that long, is a terrible thing to do to our national security. But on top of that, think about the time and the moment we're in. We're at war in Iran. We have the World Cup here in the United States. We have a China that's threatening Taiwan. You have Russia and Ukraine killing civilians. We're at a time of huge threats to the United States. ISIS and Al-Qaeda still want to attack us here at home. They want to inspire attacks here. They want to kill Americans overseas. This is a terrible time for Congress and the president, frankly, to be allowing Section 702 to expire.
I want to just play Senator Ron Wyden on the floor of the House of the Senate on Thursday, and then we'll continue our conversation.
Sure. Bipartisan majorities in both the House and the Senate have now rejected what I consider to be the surveillance status quo. And I believe there just have been too many abuses of Americans' rights across multiple administrations, and members of Congress are now standing up and saying no more. The only viable path forward is one that leads to real reforms. The Congress has already punted on Section 702 twice this year. Every day that 702 is in effect without reforms is a day that Americans' rights are under threat. I believe Americans deserve new guardrails. If Congress is going to extend these authorities, and that is what we're talking about, those guardrails are essential. And at a minimum, Americans deserve transparency about how these surveillance powers have been abused. I'm offering again to extend Section 702 of FISA for 5 weeks and give the public more facts about how these surveillance powers have been abused. Defenders of the status quo seem to think that there's already enough transparency around government surveillance. So let me be very specific about what the bill that I'm now proposing would do. It would require more public disclosure about violations of our surveillance laws, including Section 702. It would require more public disclosure about warrantless searches targeting politicians, journalists, and religious leaders. This particular category of searches more than tripled in 2025, and the FBI has refused to explain why. It would require more public disclosure about warrantless surveillance of Americans outside of FISA, which the public knows virtually nothing about. And it would require the executive branch to redact and release a March 2026 FISA court ruling that found serious violations affecting Americans' rights.
What do you think of that? Would you be in favor of more public disclosure, as the senator has been advocating?
Well, look, there's no doubt that we could have more public disclosure. We've had a variety of reforms that were just done just a couple of years ago when FISA was last reauthorized. Those demonstrate that the law is being utilized appropriately, being utilized lawfully. But if the senator has concerns, public disclosure, no problem with that, as long as you don't disclose intelligence sources and methods. The problem, of course, is that we're saying this on the day that the law is expiring. We've already seen a number of reforms already implemented, right? There's no reason to be stalling up to this point. Congress constantly does this. They create this fake sense of urgency by causing a statute to expire. Congress can simply reauthorize the law permanently. Congress can legislate whenever it wants to. Nothing stops Congress from passing transparency laws, from revising the statute. Congress can do its job, but they create this fake thing, and now they've crossed the line. They've now allowed the law to expire. At midnight last night, the law's gone away. We're now down on surveillance. And Ron Wyden and everybody else who's been talking about how important this law is, he wanted to extend it for 5 weeks. It hasn't been extended. And so now we're in a time of great peril.
Jamil, you know that Congress always waits till the last minute. So this isn't new for Congress. But let's talk about what expiration means. So as of midnight last night, what has not been happening?
So what happens is we have now in place a year-long authority to collect, right? The court has authorized year-long authority. So that'll go until about March of next year.
Okay, so they have been collecting the information. So this is not a big deal.
Except here's the big problem. A number of providers have already told the government, if the law expires, which it now has, we will not accept new surveillance requests. So if you want to put up a new email address, a new phone number, a new terrorist, a new spy, none of that will go up with certain providers. In addition, some providers apparently have told the government that even for those that we're authorized to collect on, because your law has gone away, we're not going to give you the new surveillance that comes in, new emails, new phone calls, and the like, new communications. So we're going to go dark on those. Now, it won't be all providers. It won't be all collection, but a lot's going to go away. And at a time we're in great peril, that's a disaster for this country. And the problem is that Congress knows this. How do they know? Because in 2007, something similar happened. The predecessor statute, the Protect America Act, expired. The same thing, we had these extended year-long authorities. And I was in the Justice Department at the time with Attorney General Mukasey, who wrote that op-ed with me. And what we saw happen, we saw a number of providers go down, not collect new intelligence, not go up on new surveillances. And so we've had this experience before. And in fact, not only did we tell Congress about that in 2007, the Biden administration, in 2024 wrote a letter to Congress as this law was expiring again, a self-created congressional cliff for no reason. And they said, we're worried this is going to happen again. We've talked to the providers. We know it's going to happen. So they've been warned multiple times. They knew exactly what was going to happen, and they've walked right into the wall, and now we've crossed the line, and it's on Congress. They to do their jobs. If something happens in this country, every member of Congress who didn't reauthorize this and went home last night is to blame.
If you have a question about FISA and the intelligence community, you can start calling now. Jamil Jaffer is our guest. He'll be with us for about the next half hour. Republicans are on 202-748-8001. Democrats, 202-748-8000. And Independents, 202-748-8002. So why was this created in the first place in 2008? What is it giving us that we did not have before?
So what happened was back in the 1970s, when we passed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the way that communications generally worked was that long-distance communications were done over satellites. And short-distance communications were over wires. And so when we wrote the law involving wires and over-the-air communications, different laws, different rules for different types of communications. Well, by 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, that had swapped. Most long-distance communications were on fibers under the ocean, wires, and local communications, cell phones, were over sort of radio, right? And so because the law was stuck in radio and wire land and telecommunications technology had changed, we needed an update to the law. So in about 2006, 2007, the president and the attorney general and the DNI went to Congress and said we need to update the law. If you remember, during that interim period between 01 and 07, the president had authorized certain surveillance on his own authorities. That broke out into the public. That became very controversial. So the president went to Congress, asked for a law. We got Section 702 that basically reauthorized the collection that we'd always been doing. It allowed the U.S. government to go to providers in the United States and collect on foreigners. These are non-Americans located overseas. It's not about Americans at all. It's not about people in the United States, only foreigners located outside the United States.
Unless Americans call those people.
Of course, but like any surveillance, if I'm surveilling a mafioso and I call him or he calls me, right, of course my conversation is going to be recorded. Now, in the context of criminal surveillance, you often see the FBI turn the call on or off, depending on if it's relevant. In foreign intelligence, you keep it always on because they'll use coded language, they'll use foreign languages, you'll need to translate it, you'll need to assess it. So there's a little bit of a difference, but what we do then is we minimize any collection of Americans. We redact the names, we remove identifying information and the like. So if there are Americans collected in there, it's all redacted. And here's the thing. If you want to collect on that American, you have to go get a court order from a court to collect on that American, whether they're in the U.S. or overseas. And that's the key change that 702 made. Used to be, if an American was outside the United States, you could simply go to the Attorney General. 702 added additional protections for Americans located outside the United States. Those are gone, by the way, with the expiration.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and put on the screen what FISA Section 702 says, so everybody is on the same page with us. Here's what it says. It allows intelligence agencies to conduct warrantless surveillance of non-citizens based outside the U.S. Some U.S. communications can appear in collections if Americans are talking with non-U.S. citizens overseas. And then data collected is stored for years in a searchable database that intelligence agencies can tap as part of other investigations. We're going to just take a quick call, bring James into the conversation. Rome, Georgia, Independent Line. Go ahead, James.
Oh, yes. I'd just like to say this before I get to what I like to say. This gentleman here is the one who was under George Bush doing wireless warranties on people, on American citizens. But the Fourth Amendment protects you against this 702. We should not have to give up any of our Fourth Amendment rights in order for the government to protect us. All this is what's going on. They're going to use this for is on Trump's enemies, so-called perceived enemies, and the senators, people who don't like him, and protesters and stuff, and spying on during the election and stuff. This is what this is used for. If it's important enough for you to want to know what a person was saying or want, how long does that take? 5 minutes. You can go, you can do digital, you can do it however you can do it. You know, do not do this. This is America. So this is Germany. We're in Nazi Germany right now with Trump.
So, James, we got that. Let's ask about Fourth Amendment protections and the possibility of abuse by the caller was talking about President Trump's perceived enemies.
Yeah. Well, the caller raises a very important point. This is a question that's been debated a lot in Congress, talked about a lot. This is one of the key issues. So, first of all, the authority doesn't allow you to collect against Americans at all. It only allows you to collect against foreigners located outside the United States. Now, we were talking about earlier, as the caller raised, you might have an American who's talking to a foreigner located outside the United States. However, you're only getting that communication. It's redacted unless it's important to understand the foreign intelligence. And then if you want to collect on an American, you have to go get a court order from the FISA court or another federal judge.
But we have to trust the intelligence agencies to redact the proper things, to not abuse it, to not go in, and we've seen evidence of this, to go in and search this database on Americans for other things like journalists, political leaders, etc.
Well, here's the great thing. We've got 20 years of experience with this law. We know exactly what's been done because you don't just have to trust the intelligence community. The Congress looks at it, the House Intelligence Committee, the Senate Intelligence Committee. You have outside advocates that are now brought into the FISA court that look at it and make arguments in the FISA court. You now have the DNI releases an annual statistical transparency report every year. There have been a tremendous number of reforms made to provide more public information, more information to Congress, more information to the Inspector General of the intelligence community, more information to the Inspector General of the FBI, the CIA, the NSA. So there's a ton of people besides just the intelligence community looking at these issues. And guess what we found? Very little intentional failures. Very, very few errors made. There are a lot of errors, a lot of mistakes made, no question, right? But when they make those mistakes, they self-report. The court imposes additional measures, and the intelligence community has to do a better job. But very few intentional things where the law is being violated, and where those things happen, those people lose their security clearances, and they're prosecuted. So, and by the way, typically, you know when that's happening? That's when somebody looks up their boyfriend or their girlfriend. They look in the intelligence collection to see if they're in there. It's very rare where anybody's trying to surveil an American for some sort of purpose that's about political enemies or the like. And to the extent those are found, they're prosecuted.
Dale is a Republican in Bella Vista, Arkansas. Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, so I have a question for him. My question, I have a couple things I'd like to say as well. As far as the surveillance goes, I myself, about 7 years ago, I have an empty lot next door to my house, and a huge drone came down and hovered in the daytime over this empty lot. It was just above the trees, and it was huge. It was the size of a large living room. And I was outside in my garden, and I walked over and I looked at it, and it sat there and just hovered for, gosh, it seemed like forever. It might have only been a couple minutes. Another time, I had a small one come down in my backyard and hover behind the second-story living room windows. And a friend of mine was there with me. We were sitting in the living room, and he said, "What the heck is that?" And it just was gone.
So you're worried, Dale, that that's government surveillance?
I don't know. But, my question for the gentleman is, how soon would he think this would be implemented? And would it involve drones? Because I did feel like I have a lot of windows in the back of the living room, and we both felt like it was looking in my windows.
All right. Go ahead.
Well, this is a great question. You know, a lot of people are concerned about, we've heard a lot about drones that people have seen around their houses, in public spaces, some that even the government can't explain, flying objects that we can't really understand. The government's doing some looking into this, try to figure out what's going on. Some drones may be privately flown by individuals. Some might be government surveillance as well. The important thing about FISA 702 is it doesn't authorize any of that. It doesn't authorize the use of drones or surveillance against Americans. If you're going to do any of that, whether it's video surveillance or audio surveillance, and you're going to do it under the foreign intelligence laws, you have to go get an order from a federal court. You have to do that whether it's in the United States, in Dale's backyard or the like, or in somebody's home or on their work phone, or if they're outside the United States. You have to go get a court order from a federal judge. 702 doesn't apply to any of that, but it's a really important question and one that a lot of Americans are very concerned about.
So Senator Thune had said, we played a clip in the last section about Section 702 saving American lives, and he said that that's a fact. Can you share, is any of that public, that that surveillance that has been done under this section has actually saved American lives?
So the government has declassified certain sort of small snippets of information that have come out of Section 702 at a very sort of high level, describing the kind of stuff we get. So the kind of stuff we get is information about terrorist plots actively focused on Americans in the United States, terrorist plots against Americans and our allies overseas. We've seen that information in what the government has declassified. So we know at a minimum those kind of things are what we collect on. Individuals who want to threaten Americans and harm them here. Individuals who want to recruit Americans in the United States
to be clear, we would not be able to collect that information without 702?
That's exactly right.
That's the only thing that's allowing us to collect that information on threats to the United States.
So we have other surveillance authorities to conduct a collection outside the United States against foreigners outside. This allows us to collect in the United States. You think about it, all the American providers that provide global telecommunications, we're able to collect here against foreigners overseas. And so that's why it's so important. That's why it's so productive. And what I'll say is this. If that surveillance authority went away, about more than half of the information in the president's daily brief goes away. The stuff that the intelligence community thinks is the most important stuff to brief the president. More than half of that goes away overnight. Now, could we make up some of that overseas? Of course. Would that be less good? Dramatically less good. In addition, when you collect overseas, and now that this law has gone away, all those protections we talked about for Americans, that court order for Americans overseas, that goes away too. All the transparency we talked about, all the inspector general reviews, all the congressional oversight, all that gone at midnight last night when that law expired. So for all those people who are concerned about privacy and civil liberties, as I am, all those protections go away because Congress let the law expire. Again, walking over a cliff they created. They didn't have to create that cliff. Again, they can reauthorize this law now, make it permanent, and then modify it whenever they feel like it. Put in place the reforms that Senator Wyden wants to put in place. Nothing stops Congress from legislating. They create these fake cliffs for themselves, and then they walk over them, and they're surprised when we're in a disastrous situation.
In Vienna, Virginia, on the independent line, Sarah, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking my call. I guess I have a direct comment about nothing stops Congress from legislating. Congress stops itself from legislating. We know we've been in a gridlock Congress for a long time now, and this goes back and forth on both sides. So I think it's a little bit unrealistic to say, oh, let's pass this law and then we can make modifications later in the most slowest Congress we've ever experienced. Secondly, I think the controversy around this law has to do with an absolute lack of faith that we have in the director of the FBI, documented lack of faith. This man has been using taxpayer dollars to protect his girlfriend, using private jets to fly his girlfriend around and escorts for her security and her, quote, safety. So there's a high level of corruption that should be addressed in this discussion, and that is the source of the controversy here. And there needs to be some kind of oversight if we're going to be potentially impeding on Americans' rights. We have got to, as a country, remember our Constitution and remember the soldiers who died to make that Constitution, protecting that Constitution. There is an overall lack of respect for that.
Well, look, there's no question that the FBI director is controversial. We saw him at some games overseas, and people made a lot of comments. But that shouldn't change the fact that we need this collection authority, right? Whether it's the FBI director or the attorney general or the director of national intelligence or the acting director of national intelligence, there's always going to be people who have concerns about the people the president is appointing. Obviously, it was a hotly contested election, but the president's made nominations. The Senate has acted on those nominations and confirmed some of these people to those offices. So if you want to point fingers at people, right, the Senate had its chance to weigh in. It made its decisions. But then on this question of Congress legislating, I completely agree with your caller. Congress is broken. It doesn't do its job. It fails to legislate. So when you create cliffs like the one we have right here, and you intentionally let an important law expire, and you can't get agreement, the House adjourns, the Senate keeps working, but you have this controversy between Wyden and Thune, and then Congress doesn't legislate, and the law goes away. The most important intelligence collection authority we have, it goes away. So I agree. The problem is, in part, the president and who he's nominating and the controversies that's creating and how the authorities are being used. The problem is Congress not doing its job. And the problem, frankly, is the House going on a week-long vacation when this authority's expired in a time of great peril of the country. All those members are at home in their districts. There's an election in November. Those members should pay the price for going on vacation for a week when the World Cup is here. They're going to go watch World Cup games. God forbid something happens at one of those games and we didn't collect the intelligence because they went on vacation.
You mentioned the acting DNI, Bill Pulte. We got this text from Eric in Duluth, Minnesota. He says, "We are told the country is at terrible risk if FISA lapses. Strangely, the same people who tout that risk saw nothing concerning when the current administration fired the country's entire counterintelligence staff, then tried to hire a buffoon real estate flunky to be head of DNI. Get real, please, in a hurry. You can't have it both ways."
Well, look, Bill Pulte, obviously a controversial pick for acting DNI. The president has now nominated Jay Clayton, the current U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, appointed by the judges there, former SEC chairman, confirmed by the Senate, right, a partner of Sullivan and Cromwell. So the president's nominated somebody who apparently a lot of folks like Jim Himes, the Democrat ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, said he'd be a great DNI.
Do you have an opinion on that?
On Jay Clayton? I don't know Jay Clayton well enough to know. But look, he's obviously a highly capable lawyer. He's obviously served for a number of years at the SEC, right? He doesn't necessarily have national security experience, right, of the traditional kind.
Is that should that be a prerequisite for the position of Director of National Intelligence?
Well, it's a statutory requirement. The law that created the Office of Director of National Intelligence
So from what we do know, does Mr. Clayton meet that statutory requirement?
I think the Senate will have to look at that question, right? Look, he is the lead prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. That is traditionally, along with the Eastern District of Virginia, where terrorism cases and national security cases are often brought, also here in the D.C. District. So there are three primary places where litigation about national security is brought. He's the head of one of those, right? He was nominated to that by the president. He was never confirmed by the Senate, but the judges of that district did appoint him. They found him to be qualified. We'll see what the Senate thinks.
Liz in New Jersey, line for Democrats. You're on with Jamil Jaffer.
Good morning. I'm calling about this section. I would back Senator Wyden in his request to revisit this piece of legislation. The 702 is just a code number of some kind from some policy statement that was made into law by the Congress. They have a right to revisit it. What we need to do is make sure we are following the U.S. Constitution, and especially the Fourth Amendment. And we should not have agencies of any kind, FISA or whatever, going into people's houses and other materials without getting a warrant. We saw how power has been abused out in Minnesota this year. We had the Homeland Security figuring that they had the right to shoot 2 Americans that were protesting. That is not part of the U.S. Constitution. They don't have that right. And the longer we allow these excesses and use of power against the citizens, the worse it will get. So,
Jamil.
Look, I think your caller is right. Obviously, she raises important concerns about what's happened in Minnesota. Ms. Good, Mr. Pretty, those things were terrible and things that have to be looked into. They need to be investigated. We need to understand what happened, why that happened, and if there needs to be done, take action against the people involved in those incidents. That being said, that wasn't about surveillance, right? But it raises an important concern about things happening in this country and things people are concerned about. And I understand the concern about the Fourth Amendment. The important thing about Section 702 is when the FISA court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, looks at these requests by the government to conduct surveillance, they have to determine that the Fourth Amendment is being met, that the rights of Americans who might be incidentally surveilled, to your point, that might be picked up in communications with foreigners located overseas, that their rights are well protected. And the court often takes actions to police that up. Where errors are made, where there are problems with the collection, where there's over-collection, the court imposes discipline. We've seen opinion after opinion released by the government. And you know what you find, actually, is 99 times out of 100, when there's a problem, an error, a failure, the government itself self-reports to the court identifies the problem, they then put in remediation, and if need be, Congress acts and changes the law. So if Senator Wyden wants reforms, great. Let's debate the reforms in Congress like they're supposed to be, and let's pass a change to the law. Let's not let the law expire and go away and take away our ability to protect American security, protect the security of people like Ms. Good and Mr. Pretty and every other American by letting a law expire that's so important to our national security.
And here is what the Fourth Amendment says, U.S. Constitution: the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Let's talk to Igor in Tampa, Florida, Republican. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. So my name is Igor Vladimirsky Stinkikuch, and on this topic, I wanted to ask something about this FISA, but
Sorry, we lost that. Barry in Charlotte, North Carolina, independent line. Barry, go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Thank you to C-SPAN, and I just want to say thank you for Professor Jaffer for coming on this morning. I just wanted to honestly address the giant elephant in the room for Professor Jaffer that I think he's missing here. I mean, based on all of the calls this morning and that text we received earlier, it's easy to see that normal Americans have lost complete faith in the institutions that do protect American citizens. And you're asking us to do the expedient thing instead of the right thing in protecting that Fourth Amendment against illegal searches and seizures, no matter what. Like, we don't need to just expediently pass this law because we need the capability without at first going forth and protecting the Fourth Amendment. We've seen way too many examples over the last 4 years in both administrations, the Trump and the Biden administration, of institutional abuse. And you're asking us to re-up a law that allows secret courts, a FISA court, to provide warrants that nobody gets to see. It's a lot right now with the way the government's behaving. I just want your honest opinion as why we should put our faith into these institutions that have exhibited such terrible behavior towards ordinary citizens. Thank you again.
You know, Barry, I think raises an important concern that's worrying a lot of Americans, that our government is out of control and has been out of control, whether it's under this administration or the prior administration, doing things that people are concerned about, whether it's surveilling political opponents or going after political opponents or going after Americans with foreign intelligence surveillance authorities or the like. These are important concerns. And by the way, things that Americans should be concerned about. It's actually where we come from as a country. The reason we have the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Second Amendment is because we were concerned about overweening government authorities back in the day from the king, and now there's concerns about this president, the former president, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, there are concerns about what the government is doing. All that being said, the way we solve those problems is Congress gets together, the House passes a bill, the Senate passes a bill, the president signs it. We have a way of making laws. Doesn't always work, to your earlier caller's point. Isn't always fast and effective, but it's not like we didn't know this expiration was coming. We've known for months because they extended it for 45 days. We've known for months before that and years before that. We know when this is coming. There's plenty of time to do oversight. Every year, the House and Senate Intelligence Committees conduct extensive oversight over these provisions. It's not like it doesn't happen. And all this question about, secret courts, right? I know this is a thing that people talk about, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. But here's the thing. When you go get a warrant, when an FBI agent goes get a warrant, they don't do it in public. They do it in secret with the federal judge. They go to a federal judge, just the prosecutor, no defense attorney, nobody else, and they ask for a warrant. Why? Because if you didn't get a warrant in secret, the person you're surveilling would know and would stop talking about the bad stuff. Same thing with the FISA court. It's a surveillance court. Of course it happens in secret. That's how warrants are issued. When you get to review it later on, when you bring that information forward in litigation or the like, and people's concern here is, we don't have litigation. We don't bring criminal cases against intelligence targets. That's true. That's why we have all this oversight.
We asked in a previous program, if security or privacy was more important to people, because that sometimes comes up when we're talking about FISA and surveillance. A caller this morning said that's a false dichotomy. As Americans, we should have both. How would you answer that question?
I completely agree. You don't have to make the choice, right? You can have privacy and security. We have to allow the government to be able to protect the nation against threats to the nation. We have to ensure that Americans' rights are protected. That's why 702 is so important. It's about foreigners outside the United States. It's not about Americans. Yes, there's some small amount of American incidental collection that happens, but we have laws and policies to protect that. We have extensive oversight. We have a court that looks at it. We have Congress that looks at it. We have inspector generals. That's how you get that balance between privacy and security.
Do we still have inspector generals in the intelligence community?
We have. I mean, they're there by statute. Are they being filled? Is Congress doing anything about it? Again, we have to hold our elected leaders accountable. There's an election coming up in November. If you want to hold your elected leaders accountable because you don't think they're doing their jobs, you can kick them out of office. Every member of the House, 435 members of the House is up for re-election, a third of the Senate. Those people can all go away and be reelected if the American people want to move them out. And there's a presidential election in 2.5 years from now.
Elaine is in Savannah, Georgia, line for Democrats. You're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning, Mimi. Good morning. You pronounce it Jamal. Well, my question, besides a comment, is that President Trump said he doesn't believe in the CIA information or any information that he gets, that precludes anything that his bones don't confirm. So why is it so important to pass the FISA Section 702 if the president don't even read it? And if he read it, he's still going to make the judgment because of what his bones tell him.
Well, we do know the president acts on instinct. There's no doubt that this president, perhaps more than most, is an instinctual actor, right? And there's also been rumors that he doesn't get the presidential daily brief every day, doesn't necessarily read it, right? I don't know about the answer to that. I don't know how much the president acts on instinct, although I see what everybody else sees. I don't know how much of the president's daily brief he reads. What I can tell you is it is the most important thing that the president gets, whether he reads it or not, different story. And if we take away more than half of that, that's not good for the president. It's not good for the people around him who will also get a copy of it. All the cabinet officials, the attorney general, the DNI, the director of the CIA. Take away that authority. The president may not read it and may act instinctually. There's a lot of other people that protect the nation. They need that information as well.
Jerry, Broadway, Virginia, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. Look, no one in history has abused FISA more than the Biden administration did. We know that they obtained more than 1 million illegal FISA warrants to spy on conservatives and Christians and anybody they didn't like. The banks even worked with them. Banks gave them information about anyone who shopped at Bass Pro Shops or Camping World or Cabela's or Gander Mountain, or even to someone bought a Bible. And the Biden administration used that to obtain FISA warrants because Biden appointed so many liberal lunatic judges that he could get a warrant for anything.
Jerry, let's get a response on that.
Well, look, there are, as you've heard already, just on this call alone, there are people concerned about what Donald Trump is doing and going after political enemies. There are people concerned about what Joe Biden did, going after political enemies, right? I shop at Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops. I don't want the government seeing those records or getting that information.
So
but
that's actually true what the caller said?
No, but that's not what FISA 702 is about at all. In fact, you can't get that information under FISA 702. You're not allowed to get that information. You can't get my receipts from Bass Pro Shops or Cabela's. You can't get Jerry's receipts.
Banking information,
none of that. The only thing you can get is stuff about foreigners located overseas. And it's almost all about communications. Now, again, if an American calls and says, hey, Mr. Foreign Terrorist overseas, here's my Bass Pro Shop receipt buying, X amount of weapons, and they're talking to a foreign terrorist that we have surveillance on overseas, yeah, we're going to get that. But you know what? That is exactly the thing you want to get. If a terrorist has recruited an American who's saying, I bought the weapons, that's the thing you want to get. And by the way, then what are you going to do? You're going to go get a FISA court order or a Title III warrant from a federal judge. And by the way, all the FISA court judges, they're all regular Title III federal judges appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. They're not some secret judges. They're all regular federal district judges who do warrants all the time. And you got to get a warrant to go surveil that American. You might be able to get that warrant if they're talking to a terrorist overseas and have said they're going to get engaged in terrorist attacks. You might be able to get that warrant, but it would be a traditional warrant like we get every day, prosecutors get every day in federal court. Nothing new about that, just under the foreign intelligence laws.
Fowlerville, Michigan, independent line. John, you're on the air.
Hello, Mr. Jaffer. I wanted to ask you about the unconstitutional FISA court. Where in the when did the American people change the Constitution to allow this FISA court? Thank you.
Yeah, the FISA court has been controversial. There are traditional courts created under the Constitution, right? Article 3 courts. The FISA court is one of those, although there are debates about how much it's like an Article 3 court, because you've got these federal judges, the same ones who sit on federal district courts around the country. They're appointed by the Chief Justice to serve on the FISA court, and all they do in that job is enforce the FISA law and allow surveillance orders under that law. So the question is, why does the Chief Justice have the authority to do that? Why do the judges get to look at these special court orders, and why do they remain secret? So a variety of reasons. Congress passed a law in 1979 to rein in government surveillance. That was all taking place without any courts, without any judges. So they put in place a set of judges who are regular judges to come to this court appointed by the Chief Justice and do these surveillance orders. But the rules they operate under are all transparent. The rules are made by Congress under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. We can amend those laws as we did with Section 702 in 2007, 2008, right? And so all the caller and everybody can see the laws they operate under. And increasingly, we've seen the release of the court orders themselves. We've seen release of court opinions from that court that used to be not released. They've now been released. So you can actually go read a lot of the information about the FISA court. You know who the judges are. You know what orders they're releasing and the like. And so we actually know a lot more about the FISA court today than we ever have.
Okay, one more call for you from Homer, Kansas City, Democrat. Good morning.
Thanks, Mimi. Good morning, America. You know what? 9/11 was carried out by mostly Saudi Arabians with box knives. And obviously that didn't work out so well. Well, Mr. Kushner has received billions from the Saudis, and now we're mired in this quagmire. And it kills me that now and we're paying private companies to warehouse civilians and some civilians and illegal immigrants. And we're talking about FISA. It kills me, man. I tell you, and the Fourth Amendment was rendered null and void with the war on drugs. So,
last comment.
Look, I think the caller raises an important point about what happened on 9/11. So let's talk a little bit about that. The CIA saw two of the 9/11 hijackers at a terrorist meeting in Kuala Lumpur. They actually took pictures of them, Nawaf al-Hazmi and Khalid Mihdhar. The CIA knew that those two guys had visas to come to the United States. They never informed the FBI because they thought, or there were lawyers trying to figure it out, but they thought they weren't allowed to tell the law enforcement officials about these two guys. These two guys then come to the U.S. They live in San Diego, California, in their true names. If you go to the 9/11 Museum in New York and you look in the phone book from that era, remember we had phone books back in the old days, Nawaf al-Hazmi is there in his true name, a name the CIA knew, a guy they had taken a picture of at a terrorist meeting of Al-Qaeda in Kuala Lumpur a year earlier. He's living in San Diego.
Wait, why didn't they tell the FBI? These are not Americans.
Right, because they thought that you couldn't share intelligence information with law enforcement agents. They thought there was a wall between intelligence and law enforcement. Well, we took down that wall in Section 702 and other authorities that we passed after 9/11. And now people are talking about creating this new warrant rule because they don't want us to search our database of intelligence information for threats in the United States. That would recreate that exact wall, the same wall that caused the CIA to think they couldn't talk to the FBI is about to be recreated by senators like Ron Wyden, who are, in an effort to try and protect America's privacy and civil liberties, are going to re-erect that wall, recreate that same thing we did in 9/11. It's been 25 years. Let's not do that. That would be a terrible thing to do at a time when Al-Qaeda and ISIS want to kill Americans, where Iran is at a war with us right now in the Middle East. They sponsor Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. We have the World Cup here. This would be a terrible time, one, to allow this law to remain expired, and B, to do what Senator Wyden wants to do, which is put in place another wall between intelligence and law enforcement.
That's Jamil Jaffer. He is George Mason University Law School's National Security Institute founder. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.